Carl, what have you done?
Think anyone will notice? Mr. Carl Jackson, right?
Carl Jackson was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. After the sudden death of his mother at the age of 11, he moved between LA and Orlando, Florida, trying to find his way in life.
So I'm clearly a Carl Jackson fan.
Carl Jackson.
Carl Jackson.
Carl Jackson.
Although he was introduced to hard work, faith, and family values, as a struggling teen, he wandered down the path of least resistance, finding himself jailed twice. By the grace of God, he attended an evangelical church and found that there was a better way and accepted Jesus Christ as his Savior.
There's just no fake stuff about Carl Jackson.
Now, on the Salem Podcast Network, Carl has launched on a journey to help people of all races and backgrounds to discover facts of America's true past, as well as realize the benefits of utilizing their God-given gifts and talents, which far outweigh any benefit from a government subsidy or program.
Real dangerous out here. Let's roll, Carl.
Get going fast!
Redeemed, rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Carl Jackson Podcast, brought to you by the Salem Podcast Network. It is a joy and it's an honor to be a part of the team. You guys may remember me for filling in, or my stint from filling in for the Larry Elder Show. So it's a privilege and an honor to be with you. There's a lot that I want to accomplish. First and foremost, let me talk to you about the mission of the Carl Jackson Podcast or show, for those of you that might listen to my local show. But it's pretty simple. Let me read it off for you because I've just literally refined it. The mission of the Carl Jackson Podcast is to remind the American people of the wisdom of our Judeo-Christian values, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights that are based in absolute truth, and to restore American pride and independence that has produced the greatest country that God has ever given man. And I do believe that this is the greatest country that God has ever given man, despite your race, despite your sex, what's between your legs. There is great opportunity within the United States, and the only ones that can stop, or the only one that can stop you from succeeding in America is you. This is the greatest place that God has ever created. And don't ever forget it. And I will constantly remind you of that. In today's podcast, the first podcast, here's what I want to talk about. A few things. Again, Joe Rogan is at it again. Joe Rogan apologizes. Apparently, a viral video of a compilation of Joe Rogan using the N-word has surfaced. The left are doing their damnedest to try to deplatform Joe Rogan. I want to talk about that. Another thing that I want to talk about is the Ottawa Freedom Convoy. You guys may not have heard the news, but as far as the Ottawa Freedom Convoy is concerned, here's the latest. Here's what's happening. They basically, $10 million was donated through GoFundMe. GoFundMe decided to basically freeze the account, and they were going to somehow gift those donations to other charities, allegedly through charities to other charities that the truck driver supported, although the truck drivers didn't seem to know that. So we'll talk about that, but that has come to a screeching halt as a result of strong, virtuous Republicans that are no-nonsense Republicans that are finally standing up. They are AGs, so I want to talk to you about that. And lastly, it's happened again. A Democrat caught without a mask. Ruse for thee, but not for me. This is Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams was caught sitting in front of a bunch of masked students. And again, hypocrite. The word hypocrite doesn't do it justice. We'll break down that story. We'll get into that. And then just real quick, let me just bring you some of the news of the day for those of you that may not be aware. Thank God, Beijing Winter Olympics have opened up to abysmal ratings. The 16 million viewers is a record low for an opening ceremony. The last time the viewership was this low was actually back in, 1988, and actually it was higher, There were 4 million more viewers watching the opening ceremony. So thank God people are not buying into the nonsense that Xi Jinping is trying to spew, along with his corporate fascists, many of which that exist right here, sadly, in America. Also, there's a very distinct possibility that Russia will attack Ukraine anytime now. These are things that are just in the news, and I want to make sure that you hear about them from me. So on ABC's This Week, Jake Sullivan said, we believe that there is a very distinct possibility that Vladimir Putin will order an attack on Ukraine. It could take a number of different forms. It could happen as soon as tomorrow. It could take some weeks yet. And then here's more from the story. What do they plan to do about it? Sullivan said, we are ready to respond in a united, swift, and severe way with our allies and partners should he choose to move forward with a military escalation. Let me tell you why this is silly and nonsense just real quick before I move into the stories that I really want to get into of the day. We don't have to go to Ukraine. We don't need to send troops to Ukraine. If you want to end Putin's advancement on Ukraine or his possible attack against Ukraine, there's some simple things that you can do. There's some simple things that the Biden administration could do, and that is they could open up the Keystone XL pipeline. They could lease lands for fracking right here in the United States of America. All of this will put pressure on Russia. It will put pressure on Germany to perhaps start buying oil from us again. This is absolute nonsense, and we could cut down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline right away. So why people would say Trump was this Russian plant, while it is the Biden administration that seems to be doing everything in their power to appease Russia, it absolutely makes no sense to me. So that's in the news. Another thing that's in the news on the foreign policy front, Biden is rewarding Iran with a relief on nuke sanctions. I'm not sure if you heard about this. And again, I don't have time to get into the details of foreign policy, but I want to make sure that you hear this first from me. From the story, as U.S. negotiators head back to Vienna for what could be a make or break session, Secretary of State Antony Blinken signed several sanctions waivers related to Iran's civilian nuclear activities. The move reverses the Trump administration's decision to rescind them. The waivers are ultimately intended to entice Iran back to the 2015 deal that it has been violating since former President Donald Trump withdrew from the agreement in 2018 and reimposed U.S. sanctions. Now, I want you to keep in mind that Iran is the world's greatest sponsor of terrorism. So to try to work with a bunch of terrorists, this tells you how feckless and impotent, if you will, the Biden administration is when it comes to foreign policy. So that's foreign policy today in a nutshell. But good job. Make sure you continue to tune out to the Olympics. And listen, let's pray for the United States of America. I do encourage you to pray for the leaders. I know that Biden is feckless. I know that Biden is incompetent, but God can perform miracles. And listen, we're looking for a miracle in the midterms of 2022. Now, let's get to the stories that I really want to talk about, and that is Joe Rogan, Ottawa, and the hypocrite that is Stacey Abrams. Now, Stacey Abrams, again, it's nothing new with the Democrat Party. They're all hypocrites, but let's start here. We'll start with Joe Rogan. So Joe Rogan apologizes after an N-word compilation goes viral. And he says, I clearly have effed up. That's what he said. So, famed podcaster Hat Tip Breitbart, Joe Rogan has apologized for using the N-word during past podcast episodes after a compilation of him using the word surfaced on the internet amid calls to cancel him from Spotify. Rogan explained that while he never used the word directed at anyone, he says, whenever you're in a situation where you don't have to say, I'm not a racist, you effed up, and I clearly have, in his words, effed up. So I don't think this is true. And I think this is a big mistake by Joe Rogan. But I don't think Joe Rogan is doing this. I don't think Joe Rogan is apologizing out of weakness. I think Joe Rogan is apologizing because this is who Joe Rogan is. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think Joe Rogan is a liberal. Let's face it. He was a Bernie Sanders supporter. So for those of us that are on the right that are expecting Joe Rogan to act like a conservative, ain't going to happen, Captain. What I do appreciate about Joe Rogan and his podcast is that he was willing to listen to all views, all incomers, interview anyone. The show, his podcast, is based seemingly off of his curiosity, and it's been wildly successful. But the left wants to squash that. Here's the deal. When he says, let me go back to this. He says whenever you're in a situation where you have to say, I'm not a racist, you effed up. That's just not true. Republicans are constantly called racist. Black Republicans, conservatives are constantly called sellouts. It doesn't matter what is said by the Republican Party. It doesn't matter what is done. Remember, the Republican Party is the party of the Emancipation Proclamation, of Abraham Lincoln, of civil rights. This is the Republican Party. This is the heritage of the Republican Party. Can you imagine how bold the Republican Party had to be upon their conception to say that we are going to be the party that ends racism in America? Can you imagine how much courage that would have to take? Given the context of history, it's absolutely amazing what the Republican Party has accomplished. If you're not a racist, here's what I would suggest. And I would say this to Joe Rogan. Go on the offensive. Don't go on the defense. If you're not a racist, do not go on the defense. Do not apologize to these people. There's nothing that you can ever say or do that will appease these people. And Rogan is still under attack. So you guys may remember, Rogan used to host Fear Factor. I remember him from back in the day. I've watched UFC for a long time. I'm a big UFC fan. He's a comedian. I got to be honest with you. I didn't even realize that Joe Rogan was a comedian up until recently. I just happened to be flipping through YouTube and saw maybe a year ago or so, and it saw him, Joe Rogan, comedy tours, something, whatever it was, and I was like, what? Seriously? The only things that I've ever known him for were Fear Factor and then UFC. I had no idea. Anyway, but he was attacked because he hosted two doctors that are well-informed, well-knowledgeable. He hosted Dr. Peter McCullough, who's a cardiologist. If I understand correctly, Dr. Peter McCullough is, as far as being published articles, peer-reviewed articles, columns being published, he has the most of doctors within the United States, or at least cardiologists from my understanding. Then you have Dr. Robert Malone, who holds several patents in the mRNA vaccine compilation or what have you. Here's the problem with Rogan. Rogan didn't, or this is why the left hates Rogan. Rogan didn't buy into right speak. He didn't buy into the left-wing narrative. He didn't bow down to the left that are constantly saying you have to believe this about about COVID. He wanted to explore all options. He wanted to ask all questions. He wanted his audience to be well informed. And this is a problem for the left, because for the left, you're supposed to obey. You are supposed to obey, nothing more. Nothing more. This is why, listen, I'm going to do a podcast on just the Bill of Rights. Just the Bill of Rights. Because I want to re-inspire Americans to embrace our Constitution, embrace our Bill of Rights, embrace our Judeo-Christian heritage, because they're all based in absolute truth. And they're essential. They are what makes America exceptional. And this is really important. Free speech is really important. If you don't have free speech, if all you have is groupthink, you're really not a free country. And of course, if you don't have free speech, obviously the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment is extremely important. The Second Amendment is probably most important because it protects you against a tyrannical government, that wants to take away all of your rights. The problem is many Americans today, both on the left and the right, are willing to cede their authority to the government, and this has to stop. And unfortunately, you have these global fascists and these corporate fascists that are aligning with big government, that seem to be bowing down to the left-wing mob. Spotify has stayed strong for the most part, but now they're talking about they're going to issue some type of advisory warnings when it comes to COVID-19 topics and so on, etc. It's just pretty crazy. But Rogan is a threat. Rogan is a threat because he doesn't think like the typical left-wing nut job. He doesn't fall into line with what the Democrats want to hear. And quite frankly, you look at his success, you look at the numbers and the size of his audience, and as an independent I don't know if you would call him a journalist, but let's say as an independent thinker, he is a severe threat to the mainstream media. He can bring in people. He can interview people in long form. Therefore, his audience will be thoroughly informed on any and all sides of a matter. That's something that they don't have time to do on CNN, MSNBC, or quite frankly, any news show for that matter. There's just not the time to do it, that exist or such as exist in a podcast like mine or in Joe Rogan's podcast. So basically, in an attempt to quell the concerns or those calling for his cancellation, Rogan decided to, he basically suggested that he would host experts of a different opinion or experts that had more of the mainstream group thinking. Here's the problem with that. We don't know that the experts, such as Fauci, are in the mainstream because everyone else has been censored, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter. You just look at the amount of doctors that want to speak out. The Dr. Peter McCulloughs, the Dr. Robert Malone's, the frontline doctors. All of these doctors have been censored and more. So anytime you get onto any of these social media sites, you're just not hearing from that. So we don't even know if what Fauci is saying is mainstream narrative concerning the vaccine. Concerning COVID, we can actually surmise based on the evidence that has been coming out lately. Fauci and a lot of people that think like Fauci have been wrong. They've been wrong about the vaccines. They've been wrong about masks. They've been wrong about the boosters. They've been wrong about how long it would take, in their opinion, to conquer this virus. It's crazy. So here are some of the artists that were on Spotify that want Rogan to be deplatformed, and you guys have heard of them. This isn't anything new, but I want to get into this issue with the N-word because this is the latest thing. And honestly, they're going to find something against Rogan. And when I say they, I'm talking about the left, and I'm talking about useful idiots of the left that are going to try to find something on Joe Rogan to deplatform him because, again, he's a threat for a couple of reasons. One, because of the power that he holds, given his large size audience, and two, if he's not thinking right the left wants him destroyed. They've got an election coming up. They have to win this election. Those of you that are listening or have been listeners to my radio show are probably aware of what's called the Great Reset. These are the things that the left wants to accomplish. They want this like global fascism and this Great Reset, and it's people like Joe Rogan, knowingly or not, that are standing in the gap, that are throwing a wrench in those plans. It's pretty fascinating, and the useful idiots happen to be the artists David Crosby, Stephen Stills, Graham Nash, Niels Lofgren, and Neil Young, and the latest India Ari. None of these people I've heard of, quite frankly, except India Ari, and the only reason I remember her name is because I'm reading it, quite frankly. So, but here's the bottom line. You can't appease the left. You'll never be liked by the left, so stop trying to be liked by the left. Just focus on doing the right thing. Focus on doing the right thing with your community, with your family, hopefully with the church family. But before God, I believe in absolute truth. I believe in the God of the Bible, Jesus Christ. But focus on doing the right thing there and let the chips fall where they may everywhere else. You're not going to be liked by everybody. That doesn't mean that you should go out and try to be a jerk. But you have to understand that if you're going to have moral values, if you're going to have standards, some people are not going to like that. And as long as you're doing the right thing, and as long as your heart is pure, you have to keep walking in truth. And I got to ask this question. All right, so let me just read you. This is what India Ari says. So India Ari, the biggest thing for her is that it wasn't about the quote unquote misinformation regarding COVID that she was concerned about. What she did was she used a video compilation of Joe Rogan using the N-word, and she shared that. And she said, or she emphasizes with the people who are, or she empathizes, I'm sorry, with the people who are leaving Spotify for the COVID disinformation reasons. But an end quote. But she says, why I decided to ask my music be pulled off the Spotify is the N-word video stuff. So the N-word video stuff, that's what she's concerned about. The use of the N-word. I don't know this, but I'm curious about this. I wonder if NWA is on Spotify. I wonder if their music is on Spotify. I wonder if there's any rap music that's on Spotify that dares to use the N-word. I truly do wonder that. Listen, I'm not a fan of the N-word. Let me make this emphatically clear. I don't like it when white people use it. I don't like it when black people use it. I don't like it when Latino people use it. But here's my belief. My belief is this. If a word is bad, it's bad for everyone. The reason why I'm sitting here and I can read through these articles, but I have to bleep out, the F word because I think it's a bad word. And I don't think it's, I work with Salem. That's not what we do here, all right? But I think that's a bad word. And I think we all can agree that that is a bad word. I think that we all can agree that the N-word is a bad word. So my question to India Ari would be, is NWA on Spotify? Is Ice Cube? And I like Ice Cube. You know what I mean? I grew up in LA. I like these people, or I liked their music. I don't listen to it anymore. When I got saved, I stopped listening to that type of music because it did affect me. It did affect me in a negative way. And for those of you that know my testimony and know some of my story, you can't listen to that music and lie and say that it doesn't impact you. It obviously it does. It does. So I just wonder. I haven't checked. NWA, Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, all of these people, are they on Spotify? Have they used the N-word? Are there other rappers that have used the N-word? Because I got to tell you something. If you're going to call out a white person for using that word, albeit it was out of context concerning Joe Rogan, if you're going to call him out, then I don't believe that India Ari has the moral authority to do so unless she's going to say everybody needs to stop using that word. Now, in context, I can't fault Joe Rogan. I don't believe for a minute Joe Rogan is a racist. And when you hear the audio clip, listen, people know Joe Rogan. People working around that guy knows that he's not a racist. And oftentimes when he used the N-word, he was quoting someone or using it in, and I'm not defending it, but using it in a context in where it's sad, but that word is used so often in casual conversation. I can remember playing basketball with a buddy of mine that happens to be Latino, and he would use it incessantly, and I got upset about it. I just didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear it from him, and I used to use it. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not some, saint. I used to use it. But there came a point in my life where I just said, you know what? That word is wrong. And when God convicted me, I realized that word is wrong. It's not just wrong for me. It's wrong for everybody. And that's where we should stand. So listen, free speech is free speech. I stand for Joe Rogan. I don't want Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, if you happen to ever hear this, don't back down. Don't apologize. If you know in your heart of hearts that you're not a racist, okay, decide in your heart, determine not to use that word, but do not bow down to these left-wing radicals that are demanding that you not be you. I don't like all speech. None of us do. Some of us are going to hear things we don't want to hear. Some of us are going to be offended by things that we hear. Some of us are going to be hurt by things that we hear. But that's free speech. Free speech in America is important. That's what makes us an exceptional nation. And that's why, or one of the reasons why, this is the greatest country God has ever given man. I'm going to allow you to listen to this audio clip in closing, so you can make, or at least closing this segment, so you can make your own decisions. When we get back, I want to talk about the Ottawa truck drivers and their right to assemble. Listen, I know they're not Americans, but I want to tell you why this story of Ottawa, the Ottawa Freedom Convoy, is just so captivating to Americans. I'll talk about that next. This is a Carl Jackson podcast.
I'm making this video to talk about the most regretful and shameful thing that I've ever had to talk about publicly. There's a video that's out that's a compilation of me saying the N-word. It's a video that's made of clips taken out of context of me of 12 years of conversations on my podcast, and it's all smushed together, and it looks fucking horrible, even to me. Now, I know that to most people, there's no context where a white person is ever allowed to say that word, never mind publicly on a podcast. And I agree with that now. I haven't said it in years, but for a long time, when I would bring that word up, like if it would come up in conversation, instead of saying the N-word, I would just say the word. I thought as long as it was in context, people would understand what I was doing. I was also talking about how there's not another word like it in the entire English language, because it's a word where only one group of people is allowed to use it, and they can use it in so many different ways. Like if a white person says that word, it's racist and toxic, but a black person can use it, and it could be a punchline. It could be a term of endearment. It could be lyrics to a rap song. It could be a positive affirmation. It's a very unusual word, but it's not my word to use. I'm well aware of that now. And there's another clip that I have to address. There's a clip from 11 years ago. I was telling a story on the podcast about how me and my friend Tommy and his girlfriend, we got really high. We were in Philadelphia, and we went to go see Planet of the Apes. And we didn't know where we were going. We just got dropped off by a cab, and we got dropped off in this all-black neighborhood. And I was trying to make the story entertaining, and I said we got out, and it was like we were in Africa. It's like we were in Planet of the Apes. I did not, nor would I ever say that black people are apes, but it sure fucking sounded like that. And I immediately afterwards said, that's a racist thing to say. I deleted that whole podcast, but obviously somebody made a clip out of it and taken out of context. It looks terrible, but it looks terrible even in context. It's a fucking idiotic thing to say. And I was just trying to be entertaining. I certainly wasn't trying to be racist. And I certainly would never want to offend someone for entertainment with something as stupid as racism. My sincere and humble apologies. I wish there was more that I could say, but all of this is just me talking from the bottom of my heart. It makes me sick watching that video.
Carl, what have you done?
Think anyone will notice? Mr. Carl Jackson.
All right, now I want to talk to you about the Ottawa Freedom Convoy. I'm not sure if you guys have heard this news, but the Ottawa Freedom Convoy basically had their GoFundMe account jacked by the owners of GoFundMe. So we'll get into this, and then hat tip just the news. 3 Republican AGs will investigate GoFundMe following removal of a Canadian trucker fundraiser. This is very important. Let me tell you why I think the Ottawa Freedom Convoy has gained so much momentum, and why so many people are inspired by them, including Americans. You would think that it would be Americans that would be the ones standing up against tyranny, but people are inspired by what they're seeing with these Canadian truckers. And my understanding is that many American truckers do not have the same type of mandates, vaccine mandates, imposed on them as do the Canadian truckers, but obviously they have to travel to places where this type of stuff is necessary, i.e. California. One of the reasons why we have the shipping crisis, the supply chain shortage that we have, is in part due to the ports that we have in Long Beach and Los Angeles, California. The trucks out there have to meet certain emission standards that are absolutely insane and ridiculous, and so we can't get a lot of the stuff that are sitting there on the ports shipped around the country. There's just not enough drivers to abide by California and Governor Gavin Newsom's insane mandates out there. So that's part of the issue. But we're looking at these people from these truckers from Ottawa, and I got to say, I think it's more than just the fact that they're standing up for freedom. I think that we're seeing in this this freedom convoy, something that oftentimes the left wants to deny is important. And I got to be honest with you, something that the right hasn't spoke about enough, and that is manliness. I know that sounds crazy, but I want you to think about this. I spoke about this briefly on Larry Elder's show, but manliness encompasses a lot of things. It doesn't mean that you have to be some buff bodybuilder, that can kick anybody's butt, somebody in UFC and all that kind of stuff. That's not necessarily manliness. That's part of it. Physical strength is part of it. But you can be a nerd, you can be skinny, and puny, and be manly. And what I mean by that is manliness does a lot of things. Manliness, when you're a man, you're supposed to protect. This is innate. This is what's inside of you. You know this instinctively as a man when you're born until the left teaches it out of you. But you know that you're supposed to protect. You understand that you're supposed to provide. You understand that you're supposed to train up, if you will, the next generation. You know these things. You get these things as a man. We've been beat down so long as men by the feminist movement. Sometimes we don't know how to act, and sometimes we don't know what we're seeing when we see manliness pop up. Yeah, I know there's some chauvinists out there. I get it. I know there's some players out there. I get it. I know there's a lot of men that have done some of you women in the listening audience wrong. I get it. But there's also a lot of good men out there, and it's nice to see good men stand up. Good men should stand up. Good men should be the type of man that opens up a car door for a lady or opens up a door for a lady. It doesn't mean the lady is inferior. It means that man is following his DNA to be respectful. And so when you tell men to stop being men, you get a bunch of these little fruity pebble type lefties that we see popping up, everywhere. You wonder why the country is going to hell with gasoline draws on. A lot of that has to do with the lack of manliness that exists in the United States. So when we see this Ottawa Freedom Convoy, I think it's about more than just the fact that these men are protesting and standing up. I think people are getting a glimpse of what manliness looks like, and they're starting to understand that it's going to take men that are going to stand up, ladies too, but don't get me wrong, men that are going to lead, that are going to have to lead and take this fight up against tyrannical governments that are trying to pop up. Look at Justin Trudeau. That's not a man. I know he has the parts. He's not manly. That is a man. I don't want to fall into the left's narratives. If you are the owner of a penis, you're a man. You're the owner of a vagina, you are a woman. But when I talk about manliness, that is not a manly leader. Justin Trudeau is not a manly leader. Hat tip, just the news. 3 Republican AGs will investigate GoFundMe following removal of a Canadian trucker fundraiser. 3 Republican attorneys general pledged to investigate GoFundMe, GoFundMe's decision to take down a fundraiser for Canadian truckers protesting COVID-19 vaccine mandates in the capital city of Ottawa. Guys, I want to remind you that basically these stories that I'm talking about today, in one shape or the other, has something to do with the First Amendment. The freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom to assemble, the freedom to redress our government for our grievances. All of these in some way, shape, or form has something to do with the First Amendment. And we're recognizing this. We're seeing this. Now, I know that Canadians don't have our Constitution, but they do hold a lot of American-type beliefs. They really do. So this is exciting to see. So here's what happened. Over the weekend, GoFundMe canceled the fundraising Friday evening. The truckers had raised $10 million. Now, I've listened to several interviews with some of these truckers, via social media, and many of them said, listen, they have enough to make life miserable for Justin Trudeau. And unfortunately, listen, it's part of the issue. It would make things more difficult for Canadians as well. But they had the ability with the money they had raised to make stuff really difficult for Justin Trudeau for literally a couple of years. So this was not looking good. Justin Trudeau, as you know, despite being double vaxxed and having the booster has contracted COVID and went into hiding somewhere because he's not a man. He did not want to stand up, or he's not manly. He didn't want to stand up to these truckers for whatever reason. So he disappeared and just came out with ad hominem attacks against the truckers. It's insane. But here's what happened. 3 AGs stepped up, and I want to pay attention to particularly one, but I will mention all 3. Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody. Thank you, Ashley Moody. That is my AG. I'm based right out of Orlando, Florida. Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry. And West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey all said they will look into the matter of the California-based company, citing potential, and I want you to hear these words, potential deceptive practices that are affecting their state residents. Now, I want to pay attention real quick to this A.G. Morrisey of West Virginia. This guy is the bomb. This is what all attorneys generals should look like. This guy has been in office, I don't know, a few short weeks, a month or so. Anyway, he has not been in office long. He was elected when Governor Glenn Youngkin was elected to be governor of West Virginia. But this guy is no joke. I've seen him on interviews already on Sean Hannity's program, and this guy is no joke. These are the type of people. These are the type of people that we need to be looking to elect in the future. Virtuous people with strong conviction that happen to be freedom lovers, on the right side of the aisle, that are willing to put up a fight in order for us to maintain our freedom. So these, when I talk about the First Amendment and I think about these truckers, and again, I know they're Canadian, but the reason why we're inspired is because we typically embrace the First Amendment and the right to assemble. Here's what the West Virginia Attorney General said. Again, his name is Patrick Morrisey. And he said, no, wait a minute. Do I have the, I'm sorry. This isn't the gentleman that was just elected to Virginia. I'm thinking of Mayorkas. Forgive me. That's not who was involved in this. This is a different one. This is the Attorney General of West Virginia, Patrick Morrisey. Okay, Patrick Morrisey, forgive me. You're doing a good job. But Mayorkas is another one in Virginia who's doing amazing. So I will say that. But kudos to Patrick Morrisey. Here's what he said. GoFundMe now won't honor Freedom Convoy donations and will instead redirect to other charities. Can you believe this? I don't even know that that's legal. But anyway, he calls them out on Twitter. In West Virginia, organizations must, and I continue with the quote, in West Virginia, organizations must not deceive donors and engage in deceptive advertising practices. If you've been victimized, he says, by a deceptive act or practice, he says, you know what? Let us know. He puts GoFundMe on blast. On blast. These are the type of AGs that we need. We need our AGs to stand up. Guys, the elections of 2022 and 2024 are imperative. I know that we say this every election cycle, but I really do believe that the next election cycle will determine the way of the country. And it's also imperative that we understand state races are important, national races are important, local races are important. We need fighters like this in all facets of government in our states. We need people that are going to be willing to stand up to bullies. And now that you have these global corporations and the Biden administration and this whole deal with the Great Reset, all of these corporate fascists and global fascists colluding together to squash the middleman, and let me the little man, I should say, and let me make this clear. I think what'll come across as you watch this podcast and you get to know me, you'll understand that I'm the everyday American. I'm no different than you. My story is, just real quickly, that I grew up in a home with 5 brothers, 1 sister, 2 parents. My mother passed away. We went to church, all this kind of stuff. My mother passed away when I was 11 years old. That sent the family in turmoil. I started getting into trouble, in my teenage years. Later on in life, I was jailed a couple of times. She was really the glue that held the family together. And so I went through a series of life events where I struggled, where I participated in criminal activity, where I had my child, my daughter, out of wedlock. And then God radically changed my life. After being arrested twice, after fighting for custody of my daughter, God radically began changing my life. I'm an everyday American. So I got in trouble, but afterwards, knowing that I was an American, knowing that there were opportunities still available, I bust my butt. I worked hard. All the jobs that they said Americans wouldn't do, I did. And I made businesses doing those jobs, very labor-intensive type service industry jobs. And I created small business doing that and did well enough to where I'm not a rich man by any stretch of the imagination, not even close. But I did well enough to make a decent living for myself and my family. I'm just an everyday American, and I don't want to see the American dream just thrown away. And it doesn't matter. Your skin color, it does not matter. For those of you that live in the past, for God's sakes, our country is the greatest country that God has ever given man. We have a constitution that literally has processes for repentance built into our constitution. That is an amendment process. So as we evolve as a society, so do our laws, so does our thinking. It's a great constitution. But to get back to this story, in a reply tweet, Morrissey noted, and again, Morrissey is this West Virginia AG, he noted, according to their website, GoFundMe is not automatically refunding the donations. Individuals interested in a refund can submit the form below. If they do so by February 19th of 2022, this will avoid the redirecting of the donation, he says. Donald Trump Jr. chimed in. He says all GOP attorney generals should be looking at this and helping to get their money back so it can be redirected to the truckers. Don't let GoFundMe, he says, scam you. Call your AGs and let them know, Donald Trump Jr. says, GoFundMe seems to have no problem funding the BLM riots, right, of summer of 2022, the summer of chaos. They had no problem allowing those funds to grow through GoFundMe. But for some reason, they have a problem with peaceful truckers. And that's what Donald Trump said, basically. Now, because people were willing to stand up, because GoFundMe was starting to see some attorneys general just paying attention to the story, calling out the story, and putting them on blast, GoFundMe began to backtrack. So GoFundMe tweeted an update on Saturday saying that it would instead automatically refund all donations to the Freedom Convoy 2022 fundraiser. They said the update we issued earlier enabled all donors to get a refund and outlined a plan to distribute remaining funds to verified charities. Yeah, right. Selected by the Freedom Convoy organizers, they said. However, due to donor feedback, we are simplifying the process and automatically refunding donations. Hat tip to all of these AGs that were willing to stand up and put these people on blast. This is why we elect our officials. Governor DeSantis chimed in. The Landry chimed in, the AG of Louisiana, our own Ashley Moody chimed in on Twitter, but give them props to every single one of them because they put pressure on GoFundMe back down. And guys, this is something that we're going to have to do. When these corporations, and these are the type of leaders that we're going to have to elect, really important. We can't just elect Republicans for the sake of electing Republicans. We have to demand that they fight. If they don't show fight in them, we're going to have to drag them across the finish line in 2022. We're going to have to start making the calls. We're going to have to start demanding more of our leaders. But again, hat tip to this Ottawa Freedom Convoy. I respect all of you men out there that are playing a part in this. We love all of you men that are playing a part of this, and all of you men and women and children that are supporting them, donating to them, bringing them food, water, you name it, gasoline out there. All of you guys are important and are complicit in the fight for freedom. And for that, I want to say thank you. When we come back, the next thing that I want to tackle is Stacey Abrams. The mask hypocrisy continues. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast. We'll be back.
Carl, what have you done?
Think anyone will notice? Mr. Carl Jackson.
All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Podcast right here on the Salem Podcast Network. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at Carl Jackson Show. You can follow me on Parler at Carl Jackson Show, Facebook, Carl Jackson Radio. Find this podcast wherever podcasts are found. And again, I look forward to spending time with you daily. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, like the podcast, share the podcast. This is my first day here on the podcast. I look forward to growing with you and getting better and bringing material to you daily to help fight the good fight to basically save America. Listen, let me read this part of the Declaration of Independence to you. Very important part before I get into the Stacey Abrams story. Because I think this goes deeper than just the Democrat hypocrisy that's pretty obvious and blatant when we talk about Stacey Abrams in this latest mask controversy. But the Declaration of Independence says this, and this begins right in paragraph 2 of the Declaration of Independence. You guys are all familiar with this line, but I just want to remind you about the power that we, the people, have. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, and this is where I want you to pay really deep attention here, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And that's where I'll pause for now, the consent of the governed. Guys, I got to tell you that a lot of the things that we've been experiencing as a result of these lockdowns is because we've allowed our politicians to do just that. These masks, all they do is serve as a physical reminder of, basically the left wants to remind you of who's in charge. They want you to understand or want you to believe that they're in charge. You have to do what they say, but they're people that have been elected by us. They derive their power by us, by we the people. They govern accordingly. They do what we allow them to do. We have the power to kick these people out of office, and we should. The left wants to keep this COVID narrative going as long as they possibly can because they have nothing good to run on. It is as simple as that. They have to be panicking to know that it's looking like we're on the other side of this thing. I'll be careful with my wording because I want to try to stay up on as many platforms as possible. But you understand what I'm saying. They have to keep this charade going as long as possible. And as long as they can get people to comply and to continue to wear these paper diapers over your face that that many of you know are complete and utterly worthless. I can't tell you how often I see people wearing these paper diapers that will literally touch them and grab them just like they are kids, touch their car doors, people that are supposed to be wearing them in different stores or locations that I go into that'll have them under their nose and then see me and just try to play the role. I never wear one. I mean, there's a couple of places where they just absolutely demand that I wear one, and I have to because a personal situation, whatever, with a family member. But that is the only time. I will not wear those things anywhere else. I will not do it. I will not comply with this nonsense. But those things just serve as a reminder, at least to them. They basically caused us to bow down. They basically caused us to bend the knee. And they want you to be reminded that you should be fearful. Every time you see one of these paper diapers or someone, the Democrats and the left are literally clapping their hands because they want you to be reminded that you should be living in fear. And when you live in fear, here's what you do when you live in fear. When you live in fear, in constant and perpetual fear, you are willing to cede your authority, your power to these politicians who claim they know better than you do. You can read just like they can read. You're privy to a lot of information that they're privy to. Not all, but enough. There's a lot of smart doctors that disagree with the CDC, and we see that the CDC has bent over backwards in order to change the meaning of a vaccination. It's absolutely crazy. We've seen that people like fascist Fauci, the Democrat strategist, has literally during the 2020 riots basically said it was okay during the pandemic to go out and riot. That was a just cause. But then this guy's for lockdowns. He's for masks. He's for everything. It's insane. Hat tip New York Post. Stacey Abrams is slammed for maskless picture surrounded by masked kids. So the Democratic star and Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams has sparked outrage after tweeting a photo of herself posing indoors with masked up students. And she wasn't wearing a mask herself. So again, ruse for thee, but not for me. This is what they believe. And here's what scares me. Not only are we ceding power unnecessarily so to people like Stacey Abrams, but I'm really concerned about these kids that are growing up. Because these kids are being taught to be submissive to government dictates. One of the things that makes America so powerful is our rugged independence, that American spirit that unfortunately we seem to be losing. That skepticism. It is always good to be skeptical about your government. It doesn't mean that every person in government is bad, but it means that we understand our founding fathers got it right. These people in power derive their power from the consent of the governed, us, we the people. We can't rest on our laurels leading up to 2022, 2024. We can't take it easy. I think the elections are more than elections. They serve as a reminder to these people, these hypocrites like Stacey Abrams, who's in charge, who's really in charge. But I'm telling you, you guys should be fighting because we are raising a generation of submissive Americans and, dare I say, wimps. Abrams is 48. She joined some of her Democratic peers, including Gavin Newsom, the San Francisco mayor, London Breed, all of these hypocrites, Mayor Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles, that are all a part of this. They've been caught without masks while supporting strict mask mandates. All of these hypocrites. And it was Abrams who initially tweeted the photo. This is the funny thing. She took it down, but she was the one that initially, tweeted it. She didn't see the hypocrisy in it, apparently. But she tweeted, and I quote, spending time with Glenwood's amazing students, faculty, and staff ranks as spectacular, delightful, and outstanding. So everyone in the room was wearing a mask, including the adults in the room. Everyone was wearing a mask except Stacey Abrams. And this is another thing. I just want you to think about visually what those kids in that room are seeing and perceiving, as well as the adults. We all have to be masked up. It's no longer a government. When you have this politician, Stacey Abrams, more than likely running for governor of Georgia again against Brian Kemp or whoever will win in the primary there, the Republican primary there. But it sends a strong message. It sends a message of compliance. Children comply, adults comply. Politician doesn't need to comply because I have the power. You guys don't. And it puts us, not almost, it does. It really puts us in, with our government, in a child-parent relationship rather than a relationship where it's we the people that are in control of our politicians. Now, we trust them to represent us. They don't always. They represent themselves and their own interests far too many times, far too often. But we have the power, and we can take the power back beginning in 2022, and I hope that you'll rise up to do so. Abrams' tweet was taken down, again, as I said, but users posted pictures of the politician answering questions while others were masked up during the Q&A as she posed for photos with the covering. Now, Abrams is vaccinated, and this is another thing. Abrams is vaccinated. The children are not in danger, let's say, of this virus. They're all masked up. Stacey Abrams happens to be a big girl. I'm not knocking her. I'm just telling the truth. Happens to be a big girl. So this is something, this virus is something that could impact overweight people. So, okay, so she's vaccinated. Well, she can feel safe. I'd like to know if other people in that room are. So if these, let's call them shots or therapeutics work, why are all these people masked up? And again, the kids don't need to be. Listen, I have no problem bashing Stacey Abrams when it comes to this, because if you live by the gun, you die by the gun. And I'm speaking metaphorically, all right? But if you live by the gun, you die by the gun. If you're going to speak out and talk about or impose strict mask mandates, then you should follow them. But this tells us another thing. They don't believe this stuff. They don't believe this stuff. But they want the power. They are obsessed with the power. Again, Gavin Newsom at the LA Rams 49ers game nearly a couple of weeks ago, maskless, taking a picture with Magic Johnson. Mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles, the same thing. Mayor London Breed of San Francisco, the same thing. They don't believe this stuff, but they need it to retain their power. And that's their power over you. But again, they only derive their power by the consent of the governed. Guys, can we agree upon this? Heading into 2022 and 2024, we will not cede any more power to these left-wing radicals that want to be these little wannabe dictators. Guys, I appreciate you tuning in to my first podcast. And until next time, until tomorrow, don't grow weary doing good, and God bless you.